This is MSNBC Live, September 2nd, 2018.
To making a case for obstruction of justice.
Where I want to bring in California Congressman Ted Lieu, Democratic member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, so what do you think of those remarks when you hear former Director of CIA Leon Panetta saying it's coming to a close of obstruction of justice?
Thank you, Francis, for your question. Mr. Panetta is absolutely right. I'm a former prosecutor. I can tell you the obstruction of justice law is very... Donald Trump did that. He fired James Comey, and then he went on national TV a few days later and said the one thing his attorneys would have told him never to say, which is that he fired Comey because of the Russia investigation. That's textbook obstruction of justice, and I think that's why last week you had Donald Trump send this crazy tweet out saying somehow that tape was altered.
Can it stand on that alone? You're saying it's textbook, but there's got to be more than that? Would there need to be more than that, or...?
That act, to me, constitutes one count of obstruction of justice. I believe Robert Mueller can make other counts, including the pressure for James Comey to lay off Michael Flynn, for Donald Trump to put immense pressure to have his Attorney General fired, to have Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein fired. There are a number of counts of obstruction of justice that I believe the special counsel can put out, and we'll see what happens when the report comes out.
Well, when we're talking about that, and then along with the impeachment here, there's a new poll I want to talk to you about that shows overall voters split on whether impeachment proceedings should begin. You've got an overwhelming 75% of Democrats in favor. What would you do if Democrats retake the House?
Well, let me first say it is remarkable that now more people in America believe Donald Trump should be impeached than not to be impeached. My view is that impeachment, like the power to declare war, is one of the gravest responsibilities of Congress. It should never be our first option, and we need to do it based on the facts and the law. So I think we need to wait for Special Counsel Mueller's investigation to conclude. He may make the decision for us very easy, but I think we should wait for that investigation to terminate, and then we can proceed from there.
Well, when it comes to that in timeline, Rudy Giuliani has told NBC News that he expects that investigation to wrap up by Friday. First he said September 1st, then September 7th, 60 days before the midterms, and says if the Mueller report is unfavorable to the president here, and he and the Trump defense team would issue its own report. What would that look like?
Let me first say Rudy Giuliani goes on national TV and makes a number of statements that are not true. Then he has to retract them and clarify them. Clearly, the special counsel investigation did not end as of this past Friday. It's going to continue because every time you get someone else to plead guilty and they cooperate, like Mr. Patton last week, it might open up new leads. So there's no timeline for terminating an investigation. And in terms of a rebuttal report, I think the president certainly has a right to issue a rebuttal report. I don't see how they can do it without first seeing what Special Counsel Mueller releases.
Well, what's your level of concern here about that investigation interfering with November, with the midterms coming up?
Special Counsel Mueller is a Vietnam War veteran. He's a class act. He's a very respected member on both sides of the aisle. I don't think he's going to try to mess with the midterms. I think he's going to do his law enforcement investigation and proceed with it, and then we'll see what his report shows. But I don't think he's going to intentionally try to mess with the midterms.
Yeah, I want to go back to what we were just talking about here when it comes to the president, his defense team coming out with its own report and the so-called counter report. What would you expect to be in that?
I have no idea. You're asking me to think how the president thinks. I can't do that.
What could be out there?
Well, they've been attacking the legitimacy of Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. Numerous courts have already upheld that. They've also gone down this crazy conspiracy theory path of attacking people like FBI official Bruce Orr. All he did was he passed along information about the Steele dossier to FBI officials. That's what he's supposed to do as a law enforcement agent. So I don't really know what credible attacks they have, and I don't even know how they can write this report without seeing the evidence that Special Counsel Mueller has. And we know, just based on various indictments, guilty pleas, and convictions, that the special counsel has a lot of information that nobody else has.
Well, we heard from Leon Panetta earlier, and in those remarks, he also said that they have to be careful when it comes to President, his advisors, his lawyers, have to be careful about these tactics with the special counsel because that could backfire. So in that sense, if it does, how would it, and what would that look like in the sense of hurting his client, the president?
The central lesson of Watergate is that no one is above the law, not even the president. That is the essence of our democracy. And what we see now with various arguments from Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump is that somehow the president is above the law, that somehow he doesn't have to do a normal interview like any other witness, that he has to have these special restrictions, and that obstruction of justice somehow doesn't apply to him. None of that is true. The law is the law, and in America, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, we all respect the rule of law.
Yeah, the rule of law, but then you have the pushback there. When it comes to the numbers of this poll from the Washington Post and ABC News saying that 63% shows support for the Mueller investigation. So why would the president and his legal team continue to push so hard against it, knowing that we see this number right here of those who support it, 63%?
Because I believe the president is guilty. I know that when you look at innocent people and guilty people, there's something called consciousness of guilt. What would a guilty person do that an innocent person would not? One thing a guilty person would do is repeatedly attack law enforcement and repeatedly try to slander investigators and prosecutors. If Donald Trump truly was innocent, he would let the investigation proceed. He wouldn't try to interfere with it, and he would know that an investigation would clear him. But he's not doing that because I think he has committed at least one or more acts that have violated federal law.
You know, at any moment now, I want to switch gears and talk about Senator John McCain, because any moment now he'll be laid to rest at the National Memorial Service there. But the one yesterday, President Trump was not invited, as we all clearly know. He stayed in Washington for the weekend, but fired off that tweet storm, then went golfing. So what was your interpretation of all of that, knowing you put the timeline together and you know this is happening at the same time we're hearing from the president as these images here?
Many Americans gathered together to both mourn and celebrate the life of John McCain, an American hero. It was a unifying moment for America, and it was very disconcerting for the President of the United States to launch a number of misleading, over-the-top tweets. He was trying to make yesterday all about himself, trying to put his own priorities over that of our nation. Americans don't like that, and that's one reason Donald Trump has hit a record 60% disapproval rating, according to the latest Washington Post poll.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us, California Congressman Ted Lieu. I appreciate your time. Meanwhile, as we wait for that private ceremony at the U.S. Naval Academy for John McCain, his friend